From showing up hammered at inauguration, to installing a secret Diet Coke button in the Oval Office, to pre-gaming cabinet meetings with orange Gatorade. This is every U.S. president's favorite drink. And some of these are so intoxicating, you'll be wondering if anyone in D.C. was ever actually sober. Like George Washington, whose favorite drink was Madeira wine, a sweet wine from the Portuguese island of Madeira. And he loved it so much, he didn't just sip it, he shipped it in by the barrel. Seriously. 'Cause when the British slapped a fat tax on it, Washington didn't quit drinking. He just smuggled it instead. But while Washington downed wine, John Adams started every morning with a glass of hard cider. And by hard, I mean alcoholic. He swore it kept him healthy, happy, and ready to pick a fight with Congress before lunch. But Adams actually had some drinking principles. 'Cause during the Revolution, he gave up tea entirely. After the Boston Tea Party, tea was basically treason in a cup. So he and Abigail made the patriotic switch to coffee instead. Meanwhile, Thomas Jefferson's favorite drink was wine. Except he didn't just drink it. He studied it like a scientist. 'Cause while other Americans were guzzling rum and Madeira, Jefferson was in France falling in love with fine European vintages. Bordeaux, Burgundy, Chianti. The kind of stuff that made colonial booze taste like cough syrup. And he was so intrigued, he kept obsessive notes on every bottle, like flavor, color, and acidity. The man was basically America's first sommelier. But while Jefferson sipped fine wine, James Madison tried to avoid alcohol altogether. 'Cause at 5'4", 100 pounds, one drink would have Madison kneeled over with a hangover the next morning. So he stuck to coffee and tea instead. Here's the bucket, sir. But this next president's palate was just like Thomas Jefferson's. 'Cause during his time as U.S. Minister to France, James Monroe picked up a taste for Bordeaux and champagne. So after he became president, he turned the White House into a full-blown import operation, shipping in over 1,000 bottles. Let's keep this one for us, boys. But if there was a PhD in drinking Madeira wine, John Quincy Adams would have graduated summa cum laude. 'Cause in one legendary blind taste test, he correctly identified 11 out of 14 different Madeiras. 11! Sir, I think you have a superpower. Kinda like Andrew Jackson, who didn't just drink whiskey, he practically was whiskey. Strong, fiery, and ready to start a fight. 'Cause during his 1829 inauguration, thousands of supporters stormed the White House for a celebration fueled by whiskey punch. And things got so crazy, people tore down curtains, smashed china, and trampled their muddy boots on the carpet. By the way, this was way before the Secret Service was around, so don't be looking at me. But you know who else loved whiskey? Martin Van Buren. 'Cause the man was such a legend with a bottle, people called him Blue Whiskey Van. A dude with an iron liver who could down glass after glass and still outwit anyone in the room. But perhaps Van Buren had a little too much liquid courage. 'Cause in the 1840 campaign, he ran against William Henry Harrison and mocked him as an out-of-touch general who'd be happy living in a log cabin with a barrel of hard cider. Which sounds awesome, but was supposed to be an insult, I guess. But Harrison's team turned around and said, "Perfect, let's run with it," and launched the Log Cabin and Hard Cider campaign, where Harrison not only enjoyed his favorite drink with the common man, but literally got elected president because of it. Cheers! But after William Henry Harrison died just 31 days into office, John Tyler stepped up with a sparkle of French champagne. In fact, he'd often host parties at the White House filled with music, dancing, and endless champagne. Chug, chug, chug! But the parties came to a screeching halt when James Polk became president, 'cause the man was all business. He and his wife Sarah banned hard liquor from the White House entirely. And guests even nicknamed the First Lady Sahara Sarah because her receptions were drier than the desert. But Polk didn't care. He preferred to start his mornings with coffee, 1 cup for every new state he added to the Union. But of all the presidential drinking stories, Zachary Taylor's might be the most ironic, because Taylor's favorite drink was cold milk on the rocks. Way healthier than alcohol, right? Well, not so fast, because this innocent beverage may have led to his demise. On a blistering 4th of July celebration in 1850, Taylor needed to cool off, so he ran inside and enjoyed a big bowl of iced milk with fresh cherries. But little did he know, bad move, cause the cherries were washed in contaminated DC water, causing Taylor to fall violently ill. And just 5 days later, he was gone. A man who survived the battlefield only to lose the final fight to cherries and milk. Meanwhile, Millard Fillmore kept things simpler with water and a cup of tea. Yeah, that's pretty much it. But I wish I could say the same for this next president. Cause Franklin Pierce's favorite drink was everything. Whiskey, rum, wine. If it came in a bottle, he was drinking it. But not in the ha-ha party president kind of way. In the real alcoholic type of way. Because Pierce sadly leaned on alcohol after the tragic loss of his young son. And after his wife Jane died, he fell into an even darker depression. Once telling a friend, "What can an ex-president do but get drunk?" "Sir, we can play checkers." "Chess? You like Scrabble?" But sadly, it didn't work, because Pierce died from a liver disease caused by alcoholism. A lesson I hope this next president learned from. Because, just like George Washington, James Buchanan loved Madeira wine. So much so that when he was a student assigned a navigation project, he chose to sail to the island of Madeira. And decades later, his mansion in Pennsylvania had a sprawling wine cellar packed with the stuff. Okay, why is every president obsessed with this stuff? Yeah, I get it now. On the other hand, Abraham Lincoln wasn't exactly a big drinker. In fact, he was about as close to sober as a 19th century politician could get. At dinners, when everyone raised a glass of wine, Honest Abe preferred water, coffee, or even milk. But Andrew Johnson's favorite drink was whiskey. And boy, did everyone know it. Cause during Inauguration Day 1865, he was sworn in as vice president under Lincoln. And while nursing a hangover, he decided the cure was more whiskey. And 3 tumblers later, he stumbled on stage to give a short speech. Except it wasn't short and it wasn't coherent. Cause Johnson slurred, rambled, and publicly humiliated himself in front of Congress, the Supreme Court, and poor Abraham Lincoln. America, great, good stuff. Yes. I'll be taking that from you now, sir. So while Lincoln toasted with water, this guy was literally tripping over the podium. Meanwhile, Ulysses S. Grant's favorite drink was whiskey, especially Old Crow. And it might have turned him into a war hero. Cause after winning battles in the Civil War, President Lincoln said, "Find out what whiskey he drinks and send a barrel to my other generals." Which is a pretty funny way of saying whatever he's drinking is working. But when Rutherford B. Hayes became president, the White House went completely dry. No whiskey, no wine, not even a secret flask tucked behind the drapes. Instead, guests were greeted with lemonade, thanks to the First Lady, a devout temperance advocate who earned the nickname Lemonade Lucy. So while Hayes enjoyed the occasional beer when he was younger, out of love and probably survival instinct, he joined her with a cup of lemonade. But speaking of beer, that was James Garfield's favorite drink. Cause when he became president, he quietly lifted the ban on booze and ensured beer was back on tap at White House gatherings. Woohoo! But Chester A. Arthur's favorite drink? It's hard to say, cause he loved all the fancy ones. Everything from fine wines, to rich liqueurs, to whiskey highballs. The man's bar cart was as refined as his wardrobe. Cause hey, they didn't call him Elegant Arthur for nothing. But while Arthur sipped with class, the next president could have ran the country from a bar stool. Cause Grover Cleveland's favorite drink was beer, and plenty of it. He loved crowded saloons, clinking glasses, and conversations louder than campaign rallies. In fact, Cleveland's beer habit got so legendary that he and a friend once made a pact to limit themselves to 4 beers a day. But it didn't last long, cause when they realized how easily 4 glasses disappeared, they revised the rule to 4 tankards a day. Problem solved. But on the flip side, Benjamin Harrison's favorite drink was tea, served hot and proper. In an era where drinking alcohol was basically a political requirement, Harrison stood out as a man perfectly content sipping black tea. Thank you, sir. I'm still recovering from that hangover. But funny enough, William McKinley was a mix between our last 2 presidents. Not known for wild parties, but occasionally enjoyed a drink with style. In fact, during his 1896 campaign, bartenders created McKinley's Delight, a knockout blend of rye whiskey, sweet vermouth, cherry brandy, and a splash of absinthe. Basically the kind of drink that can make you annex a few islands before dessert. But unlike McKinley, Teddy Roosevelt didn't sit back and wait for bartenders to mix his drink. He'd just do it himself, cause his favorite drink was mint julep. And he grew fresh mint in the White House garden, crushed it with sugar, and mixed it with Kentucky bourbon strong enough to make me flinch. It tastes great, sir. Meanwhile, William Taft loved ginger ale, so much so that during a visit to Savannah in 1909, he downed 4 bottles at lunch. Sir, that's a lot of carbonation. But at least Taft wasn't breaking the rules, cause the irony of Woodrow Wilson's presidency is that he led the nation straight into prohibition, while quietly enjoying his own Scotch whiskey on the side. Naughty. Excuse me, sir, there's an angry mob outside who could use a drink too. And after leaving office, Wilson literally needed special congressional approval to move his personal liquor stash to his new home, since transporting booze was illegal. So while the country dried out, Wilson quietly kept his glass half full. Kinda like Warren G. Harding, who became president in the middle of the Prohibition. But Harding wasn't exactly known as a rule follower, cause his favorite drink was whiskey. And he kept a bottle tucked in his golf bag, poured bootleg liquor for his friends, and hosted weekly poker nights in the White House where the whiskey flowed free. His whiskey often came from confiscated stock seized during Prohibition raids, which technically meant the president was drinking evidence. But hey, that's just the kind of guy Harding was. Unlike Silent Cow, who didn't just talk less than other presidents, he drank a lot less too, cause publicly he kept the White House bone dry. But on occasion, he privately sipped some Tokay wine. Sweet, subtle, and perfectly understated, just like the man himself. Kinda like Herbert Hoover, who also kept the White House bone dry during Prohibition. But once he left office, Hoover made up for lost time with his signature ritual. 2 martinis every evening, and extremely dry too, mostly gin with just a whisper of vermouth. Did I get that right, sir? But this next president didn't want me sticking my beak behind the bar, cause Franklin Roosevelt's favorite drink was a dirty martini, and he preferred to mix it himself. In fact, at the 1943 Tehran Conference, FDR actually played bartender and personally mixed martinis for Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. Churchill loved it, of course, but Stalin took a sip and said, well, all right, but it is cold on the stomach. Sir, I think that's Russian for, what the heck did you just serve me? But while FDR served our allies, Harry Truman poured himself a morning bourbon, cause Truman started his day with what he called an eye-opener, a shot of bourbon mixed into his orange juice. Woof, that's strong. Let's just hope the bourbon wore off before he made any world-altering decisions. No. Sheesh. Does anyone have something to take the edge off? Thankfully, Dwight Eisenhower liked to relax with Scotch whiskey on the rocks. And there was nothing flashy about it. Just a little ice and a lot of reflection. That's more like it. But while Ike sipped Scotch, John F. Kennedy appreciated a good Bloody Mary. Cause when you're having seaside brunch at Hyannis Port every weekend, what could be better? Sir, this is the life. And when JFK wasn't in the mood for a cocktail, he'd reach for a Heineken, the first major European beer to really break into America. Of course, Kennedy was the kind of guy to be ahead of the curve. But unlike JFK, Lyndon B. Johnson didn't care about what's trendy, cause his favorite drink was a simple scotch and soda highball, and he drank it Texas style. Big glass, lots of ice, and plenty of refills. LBJ famously cruised around his ranch with a tumbler in hand, often refilled by Secret Service. Here you go, sir. Whoa! But of all the presidents, Richard Nixon might take the prize for most fancy, cause he had a deep love for fine French red wines. The only problem, he didn't like sharing. At White House dinners, guests were served affordable California Reds, while Nixon's glass came from a secret bottle of top-shelf Bordeaux. Meanwhile, Gerald Ford's favorite drink was a double martini, double strength. And hey, if I was dealing with the fallout of Watergate, I'd probably order mine by the pitcher. On the other hand, Jimmy Carter was the total opposite, cause he ran one of the driest White Houses since the Prohibition. But for him, it wasn't political, it was preference. Coming from a family that struggled with alcoholism, he mostly avoided drinking altogether, and instead opted for water, iced tea, or milk. And thank goodness he did, cause I needed to sober up. Until I tried Ronald Reagan's favorite drink, which was California wine poured with a Hollywood smile. Cause after decades in Hollywood, Reagan became a full-on ambassador for Napa and Sonoma. Cheers to the California dream. California girls, unforgettable, Daisy, sorry, sir. This is a lot stronger than I thought. But at least George H.W. Bush's favorite drink was a bit easier to handle, cause he enjoyed a vodka martini. Quiet, clean, and perfectly composed, just like himself. And outside of that, he enjoyed a cold beer at a baseball game. But speaking of beer, Bill Clinton's favorite drink was the Snake Bite, a 50-50 mix of lager beer and hard cider. He picked it up during his Oxford days and never quite let it go. But besides alcohol, Clinton mostly stuck to Diet Coke, iced tea, and smooth talking. Something George W. Bush eventually got around to after a couple detours. Cause in his younger days, Bush was a loyal follower of what he called the 4 Bs: beer, bourbon, B&B, and black velvet whiskey. Let's just say his reputation leaned more toward cowboy than connoisseur. But at age 40, Bush cleaned up his act and quit drinking altogether. So by the time he became president, he swapped cocktails for Coke Zero and non-alcoholic beer. But this next president preferred the real thing, cause Barack Obama's favorite drink was beer. From Dublin pubs on St. Paddy's Day to backyard cookouts in D.C., Obama was the rare world leader who looked completely natural with a pint in hand. But he didn't just drink beer, he brewed it. Cause under his direction, the White House kitchen created the first ever presidential homebrew, the White House Honey Ale, made with honey straight from Michelle's South Lawn beehives. Sir, something keeps getting into the beehives. Get back here! But next up is one of the few presidents who never touched alcohol his entire life. And that's Donald Trump, whose favorite drink is Diet Coke, and lots of it. Cause Trump reportedly downs as many as 12 cans a day, often delivered at the push of a Diet Coke button on the Oval Office desk. But it gets better. Cause Trump liked to prank visitors by telling them it was a nuclear button, who'd quickly tense up when he pressed it, only to see a fizzy drink arrive moments later. Great joke, sir. Let's just not get it mixed up with the other red button, okay? But speaking of non-alcoholic presidents, Joe Biden never touched the stuff either, cause he preferred orange Gatorade. Not coffee, not Diet Coke, just that bright fluorescent fuel of champions. And his aides stocked it everywhere to keep him hydrated, energized, and full of electrolytes. I'm more of a light blue kind of guy. Gah, it's freezing! But while I dry off from this Gatorade shower, I need you to check out every U.S. president's religion. From rewriting the Bible with a pair of scissors, to forgetting his assassin with his dying breath, to wondering if the Civil War was punishment from God. These religions were so inspiring